Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends. Guys, welcome back to r/Maliciouscompliance, where people follow orders to the T to spite others. And in this episode, guys, it's all about bad bosses getting what they deserve. Guys, companies are getting shut down, Karen managers are getting fired. It's gonna be a wild one. I hope you enjoy the satisfying stories today, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So I used to work in a training center for a Fortune 500 company. When class wasn't in session, the building normally only had 4 people in it. Me, a trainee, the boss, and the 2 trainers. I called in sick 2 days in a row because I had some nasty lung infection. On the second day, the boss starts ranting at me about how kids these days have no discipline, telling me I haven't taken a sick day in 9 years. Now, I tried asking if he wanted me to get a doctor's note, but he was pretty adamant about me coming in the next day. He said that he can decide if I'm actually sick, and he can send me home. I was one of the few women working in that section of the company, less than half everyone's age, and I felt like arguing with him about it was a bad idea. So cue the malicious compliance. That next morning, I decided to not pump myself full of cold meds and just go in, looking like I'm fighting for my life. As soon as I walk in the door, the trainers look at me, and I say, "I'm very sick. You might want to give me a wide berth." The 2 look at me wide-eyed, nodded, and then went to a different section of the building. The boss hears me coughing so hard, I'm having to do that gasp for air like I just emerged from the depths. My boss walks in and goes, "Oh, you really are sick. Well, you should go home. But I don't understand how you got this sick." And then he reminds me I haven't taken a sick day in 9 years. So I drive home and come back in the next day. The trainers look at me and say, "What the hell are you doing here?" I say to them, the boss said that if I'm actually sick, then he can send me home. They laughed and avoided my section of the building. The boss once again hears me coughing and gasping for air, and he comes in and dismisses me. And this time, he tells me that he doesn't need more proof, that I can come back when I feel better. 4 days later, Mr. I haven't taken a sick day in 9 years was sick with some nasty lung nonsense, and he was out for a week. If only he had more discipline. That is karma right there, guys. And that's when OP should have called him and been like, yeah, I'm gonna need you to come in today. I'll decide if you're really sick." But how ridiculous is that though, guys? Like, companies have sick days for a reason. And here's this boss still making employees come in to prove that they're sick enough. Oh my goodness. So I worked as a quality assurance person at a factory that I'll call Ida Or. To get started, I'll explain the report process. When something goes wrong in the factory that's directly tied to quality, such as bad coloring or defects, I as a QA lead would have to write a report. These reports were very detailed and extremely time-consuming. Now, when something went wrong that wasn't directly tied to quality but affected it, such as a machine breaking down, the lead in charge of the machines were supposed to write the report. But somehow, all the reports ended up being written by me, even though I had my own time-consuming job to do. I had been fighting to not do others' reports for months, and my boss told me to remind other leads when a report was needed. So one day, I'm doing my reports, plus my other duties, and I hear over the radio that a fridge unit has gone out, and all the product was coming out as boiled mush instead of frozen. So I called refrigeration and tell them, "You need to do a report on this, and I'll send out an email counting how many pallets of product we lost." So I send the email and continue on with my day. 2 weeks later, my stupid boss calls me into her office and asks me why I didn't write a report on the incident. I say, "You told me to remind the other leads to do it and not write their reports." At this, my boss responded, "Well, if you have time to send an email, you have time to write a report." She then makes me sign a write-up for failure to do my duties. Well, a couple of months later, the exact same thing happens, and all I do is tell refrigeration over the radio to write a report. I did nothing else, knowing that refrigeration wouldn't write it. Now, because there was no report or email sent, the product was almost shipped out 2 months later, but it was caught by one of my QAs, who mentioned the incident to my boss. So my boss calls me to her office and she tells me this incident is gonna cost the company millions in storage fees, disposal fees, lost product, and a fine from Walmart for not meeting contract. Why didn't you email me about this? That's when I say to her, I did not have the time, but I did tell refrigeration to write a report. Of course, she was mad, but she couldn't write me up for it because I had emails from her telling me how to handle these situations. Yeah, that boss's logic is so messed up, guys. If you have time to tell someone how to do their job, then you have time to do their job. And if you don't, you get in trouble. Bosses like this suck, guys, and I bet she's real fun to work with. Like, instead of saying that BS about the email, she should have followed up with the ones not doing the reports, right? But that would make way too much sense. So here is some backstory. I started working in care of the elderly before I graduated school, at 17, as a temp worker. And after I graduated, I basically worked full-time for several years, and finally got a steady employment at age 23. I take pride in my job, and even though I didn't study medical stuff, I've always made sure to know everything I need to know to do a good job. With online classes, certificates, reading up on medications, treatment recommendations, etc. Everything was going well, despite me having 4 different bosses in the first 5 years of work, because no one wants to be the boss here. Economically speaking, it's a sinking ship, since it's government-run and dependent on tax money. Then, friendly boss Lena joins the story. She asked me to move over to a new department that the state was now by law obligated to provide, short-term care. She had previously run the emergency care unit at the local hospital, and she didn't take crap from anyone. She let us workers build up and run the department because, as any good boss should, she realized that we knew what we were doing because we were doing it on a day-to-day basis. We knew what worked best for us, and we were free to do our jobs, as long as we stuck within the laws, regulations, staff requirements, and budget, of course. Everything was amazing for almost 2 years. Every month, I did the schedules for all 15 workers. I also did daily planning for all the patients. I was also in charge of all documentation and all new guidelines and protocols being implemented, since the care provided was brand new in our area. Then the day of great sadness came when Lena declared that she was leaving, since she'd been offered a job as the head chief of the local hospital. All of us were devastated to see her go, but good for her. And that's when super bitch Karen enters the story. Karen was already the boss of the normal care units, and we had heard exclusively bad things about her. We heard that she would always do what she thought was the right thing to do, which was almost always wrong because she was underqualified. She had no experience from the actual work, and was just a bitch in general. At our first staff meeting, she told us, either you're with me or against me, and the people who are against me, I will drown in the local lake. And I thought, okay, great start. I then tried to explain to her that with our previous boss, we'd worked with trust, since Lena had an understanding that us workers actually know what works best in our department, and Karen instantly shut that down. She said to me, no, I'm the boss. I set the protocols, and I decide how my department's run. I say to her, yeah, of course, I'm just saying that we've been working for... She then interrupts me and says, no, I'm the boss. I'm in charge. I don't need your input. And so it began. Karen started changing the schedules, the protocols, the staff requirements, the daily rehab schedule, the food schedule, and she lowered the required medical competence to work at our unit. This means there were people working with us who had no prior experience in the job, had no prior experience in the field, barely spoke the language, and keep in mind, we had dementia evaluation, end-of-life care, stroke rehabilitation, and so on. So here's where the malicious compliance takes place. Karen then starts to try to micromanage everything we did, like literally everything. She canceled all the activities we did for the whole business, like pub nights for the elderly, movie nights, summer cafe outdoors, walks, store visits, everything. All without cost to the business. She then stated that we were no longer allowed to finish the schedules on our own, and gave us 2 weeks less to finish them, which now means that we have 1 week to input the schedule, try to settle it between us 15 people, and then hand it to her. She'd then finish it, and then hand it to us the day before it went into effect. And it was a mess. Shifts weren't covered, or we were 6 people working the same weekend, when it was supposed to be 3. That's when I told Karen that I've been managing the schedule for years, and I was happy to keep doing it, and that she'd still have it 2 weeks early. She said no. I also told her that our activities were 100% within paid hours, and no strain on the day-to-day normal business, and we want to keep doing them. She also said no. I then told her that we would prefer to keep doing things as we'd been doing them for years because it worked very well. And again, no. Obviously, I was pissed, and so were my coworkers, but they never spoke up. That was my job, I guess. There were a lot of incidents that I'm not gonna bother bringing up, but just imagine that anything we've ever wanted to do for patients or people in dementia units or for the well-being of staff was a big fat no. So one thing that had been consistent since I started working there is when you apply for vacation or any kind of leave, you input the leave request and then you request a temp to cover your shift. And then you inform your boss that you're done with both those things. It's always been like that, always. So I did. I requested a day's leave and I input the temp request and then I walked to my boss's office and informed her. And Karen loses it. Maybe because her boss was there, I don't know, but she starts yelling and telling me that I'm not allowed to request temps. That's her job. I just stand there and take it like a good employee and just say, okay, won't happen again. It was a big surprise for her when the next staff meeting comes around, and there suddenly weren't any staff on the actual ward, and a local politician was sat waiting with her mother for over 2 hours. I told my boss's boss exactly why there weren't any temps scheduled for the meeting, and Karen got fired on the spot. It'll make me smile for the rest of my life. Honestly, I can't say she didn't deserve that firing. And good riddance, right? Like, I really don't know what she was trying to do though. Like, hiring more unqualified staff, canceling resident activities that didn't cost anything. That Karen took a good place to stay and she literally turned it into rooms for people to sit, get treated poorly due to unqualified staff, and then die, and nothing else. My dad is a hard worker, and this happened about 15 years ago. He worked for a company that fixed and rented heavy equipment like backhoes, scissor lifts, steamrollers, forklifts, etc. His boss, the CEO of the company, whom he reported to directly, was a middle-aged Italian guy whose grasp of English was tenuous at best. The guy understood what people were saying, but he had trouble communicating his own intentions back clearly. On the other hand, my dad had zero grasp of Italian, but he spoke perfect English. However, he was a solid mechanic, who would go on to make the machine bay of his company operate very smoothly. It got stuff done. And even though he didn't always understand what the boss wanted him to do, he just focused on the reason he was hired: to manage the repair bay, hire new mechanics, train new hires, and off-site on-call repairs. Well, for some reason, the boss guy gets it in his head that my dad's gonna replace him as the leader of the company, because he's much better liked, speaks perfect English in an English-speaking country, and has basically all the department heads coming to him for help. And so, the guy calls my dad in, chews him out, and manages to communicate that he's being fired for repeated poor work performance. My dad just smiles, shakes the guy's hand, and leaves. And thanks to his less than firm grasp on both the English language and business law, the boss guy just sent him on his way with his last paycheck and nothing else. So my dad starts his own business in the heavy equipment mechanic market. And after telling all of his old work buddies about the situation, suddenly he got a bunch of new hires. His old workplace suddenly had a lot of vacancies because people were quitting. The big boss had no idea how to fill the positions because the guy he'd hired to do that had just been fired. He went under about 6 months later. Sometimes my dad drives past where the old shop was, and when he does, he just laughs and laughs. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I love a story where an employee's fired and goes to start their own successful company, leaving the old one to just crumble. But what a stupid reason to fire someone though, and what a terrible decision by Big Boss Man. Yeah, let's just fire the best employee because I'm scared I'll lose my job to him. Well, sir, congratulations, you're still jobless in the end. A long time ago, I was working for a startup engineering firm, working as a piping design engineer. But since it was a startup firm, we didn't have a lot of manpower, and the ones we had weren't as qualified either. I was one of the very few that was qualified enough to handle a team of my own. The boss trusted me with almost everything. I was like the second in command after the boss, only because I was managing a lot of things on the side as a volunteer. Things like paycheck balancing, client meetings, quality assurance, documentation, and other stuff which he should have hired someone else to do. I was good at it, and he took full advantage of it by giving me things to do that was never under my job description. One day, he had this bright idea that we should revamp our website to attract more clients. He gave this project to his nephew, who had just graduated from college as a developer of sorts. After a week or so, the nephew came up with the final draft of the website, and the boss was fairly disappointed, as it didn't look anywhere near to what he expected. He then called me in and asked if I knew anything about website design. At the time, I was very much interested in UI/UX, and I was doing an online course to learn about it more. So I told him that I'll see what I can do. So I spent the next week making a proper information architecture, wireframes, and color guidelines that the nephew could just pick up and build the website from scratch. In the end, the website looked pretty futuristic and the boss was happy. But during the week, my other responsibilities were put in a backlog and it just kept piling on. I knew I'd be able to cover it once I'm done with the website, so I didn't pay too much attention to it. The next week, my boss caught up with the backlog and he calls me into his cabin. The guy starts yelling at me for all the responsibilities that I didn't attend to. I calmly told him that I was working on the website and it's not a big deal. I told him that I would clear it out as soon as possible, but he wasn't happy. He then asked me why I spent so much time doing something that's not even my responsibility. I told him that I was learning about UI/UX and I was pretty much interested to learn more. That's when the boss snapped and told me that I should just quit and pursue my hobby as a living. He said that only then will I understand how lucky I am to have a job that pays. Now I kind of got offended because 1, he doesn't even pay me worth the things I do for the company, and 2, the guy knew I could catch up on my work and yet he took this as an opportunity to discipline me. So I stepped out of his cabin, went to my desk and put my resignation in and went home. My boss called me a couple of times in panic and he asked me to revoke my resignation, and then made other people from the organization call me to convince me to come back. My boss knew that without me, the company can't stay afloat for long, and I wasn't having it at all. It's been 2 years now. I decided to pursue my hobby as a career, and I'm working as a product designer in one of the biggest organizations in the country, with a pay that's almost 300% more than what I was getting as a mechanical engineer. To all the people who wanted to know the company status today, the company was shut down. They had to pay a huge penalty for not being able to deliver the last project I was handling. And then COVID hit, and they had to reduce pay for all the other staff, which led people to leaving. Eventually, the company went bankrupt. Talk about the biggest mistake ever, guys. Like, I don't understand how some bosses fail to see the value of their employees. And honestly, reading a lot of these posts, guys, I think some bosses just love putting down their most capable workers, so they don't realize what they're worth. And it's funny because at the same time, it's malicious compliance, and a lot of people just move on and end up killing it in life. And in this case, OP realized what he's worth, and he makes a whopping 300% more than what he was getting paid by that crappy boss. Now, before I start, here's a bit of context for the situation. I work in the boat industry as an engine tech and parts painter. I know, quite a broad range there. Anyways, the company I work for is quite old, and the building I work in is even older. The heating system is trash, and we really lack anything in the way of air conditioning, and it's boiling outside right now. Earlier today, I had started overheating really quickly as the temperature rose in the building. I have a medical condition where my body can't regulate temperature well, meaning I'm at risk of passing out. I was going to go get a bottle of water from the fridge to help cool me down. That's when I was stopped by one of the company's managers. Let's call him Kyle for the story. Kyle says to me, "Where are you going?" I tell him I was only going to get some water. He says, "You're supposed to be working right now. You can get water during your coffee break." I reply, "I don't think you understand. I can actually be in danger from this heat right now. So could I please go get one bottle of water?" Kyle says, "No, you're not authorized to leave your work before the clock strikes. Now shut up and get back to work." Keep in mind that this conversation was held in front of my coworkers, and cue the malicious compliance. So I get back to work, making sure to put on some extra coal, just to make sure I made up for lost time. Basically, I was forcing my body into shock, and heat stroke was just around the corner. Fast forward 30 minutes, and I had to tell my coworkers, through my strained breath, that I don't feel too good. Which was actually even worse now, as I was working on the deck of one of these boats, give or take 3 meters above the floor. When I made my way towards the ladder to climb down, I only got out a very strained, "oh crap." as I fell off the back and was headed straight for the concrete floor below me. Lucky for me, some coworkers reacted fast enough and they managed to catch me before my head was split open on the floor. I woke up in an ambulance around an hour later. The EMTs were checking my vitals, and that's when my boss comes up to the door and asks me what happened. I told him exactly as I told you guys, and I told him to check with my coworkers if he didn't believe me. Long story short, I was brought to the hospital for a checkup just to make sure I didn't suffer any kind of trauma from the fall. A buddy of mine came with me to make sure I got there and back safe. A few hours passed, and my buddy gets a call, and he picked up. It was Kyle. My buddy hands me the phone, and I heard Kyle on the other end apologizing for actually almost getting me killed. The short version is, he was heavily reprimanded for what he told me, and he was put on watch. He didn't lose his position though, so I guess I didn't fully win. But he was liable for the medical compensation for my situation. I did forgive him, and just to rub it in a bit, I had to ask him, am I authorized to get water next time? And my buddy just laughed. Okay guys, even though OP did teach his boss a lesson in this one, he really put his health at risk. Like, heat stroke is nothing to mess around with, and OP with an existing health condition, teaching his boss a lesson, risking potentially dying from overheating is absolutely insane. Like, I do agree that some people need to learn the hard way, but dude, not at the expense of your own well-being. So many years ago, I was working one of my first jobs in a little cafe, nearing the end of my training period. It was a quiet day, perfect to put the newbie on with only one experienced staff member. The staff member called in sick, however, and the boss had to come in to cover, until Sue could come in early. Now, the boss wanted to use the time on site to do paperwork in the back, and he says to me, I'll be in here if you have any questions. And I very annoyingly had a lot of questions. How to avoid an incorrect transaction, where to find more special paper for the credit card machine, what to do when the coffee grinder stops working. The list went on and on. Again, new hire. Finally, the boss got sick of me and said, look, I'm busy. Don't bother me unless it's an emergency. Let me know when Sue's here. Shyly, I replied, that's what I came to tell you. Sue just arrived. The boss then said to me, great, any more questions, ask her. Don't bother me anymore. So with that, Sue took over the coffee area and got me on restocking, clearing tables, emptying the bins, and other necessary grunt work. Taking out the garbage, I went out to the outside bins through the staff parking lot, and I saw my boss's old car there with the headlights still on. I thought maybe I should tell him, so I went back to my boss's office and said, boss. Seeing me again, boss gives me a scowling look, and he snapped at me saying, is this an emergency? I replied, not to me. He then says, then go away, leave me alone. And with that, I left quickly. I went to tell Sue instead. So I went up to her and said, Sue. But then I changed my mind and said, boss doesn't want to be disturbed unless it's an emergency, so I'm supposed to ask you if I have more questions. Sue and I worked pleasantly until the end of my shift a few hours later. As I gathered my things to leave, boss ran by me, knocking into me a bit. Without turning around to see if I was okay, boss said, sorry, I'm in a rush, I'm late. I slowed down to see what happened next, getting out my brick of a phone to text my mom that I was on my way home. I could hear my boss swearing, and he calls OP. And with that, I'm thinking, oh no, boss realized what I was gonna tell him earlier. I was in trouble. He says to me, can you bring your car in and give me a jump start? My battery's dead. I respond, I walked here. I live 10 minutes up the hill. I then raced off before boss could blame me. The next time I was on shift with Sue, I asked what happened, and she said the boss left his headlights on. He came out to a dead battery. Boss then tried to jump start it with my car, but it didn't work. He had to call a taxi. She then says to me, it's funny that neither of us noticed the lights were on when we walked by it, giving me a wink. I chuckled at that. I can only imagine why she didn't say anything either. Yes, guys, the a-hole boss getting the karma they deserve. Like, what a crappy boss though. Like, your job is to basically help out the new hires and walk them through things. But that Karen boss just basically threw OP to the sharks that day. And honestly, I bet the guy wasn't even working in that office. This person shares their comments about a bad boss that says, I was a new manager at a restaurant, and the manager who was supposed to close with me decided to leave early and said, don't call unless there's a fire. As I walked past the kitchen, after the staff was gone, I noticed a flashing light. Something under and to the side of the flat top was on fire. It was small but hard to get to. I tried everything I could to pour milk on it at first, but no prevail. So I called the manager, who left me. I was kind of laughing at this point because what else do you do in a small stressful situation? I say to him, so do you know how you said to call you if there's a fire? The guy was so mad that I was finding humor in the whole thing. He told me to use the fire extinguisher, and I did. The next day, him and I were both in trouble. Him for leaving me, and me for using the fire extinguisher because they needed to clean a lot and throw away some product. I told them next time I'd let the place burn down. I was there for a couple of more months until I found a new job, as it was overall an awful company to work for. Yeah, I'd say so. Like, reading this comment made me shake my head so much, guys. Like, the person got in trouble for using a fire extinguisher to put out a fire, resulting in damaged product. Like, the boss knows that a few $100s in stored product lost is way cheaper than letting the whole place burn down, right? Because that's the alternative. Alright, so I worked for a small company for the last 2 years as a software developer. And with small, I mean I was the only employee. So for many projects my boss had, I wrote the main part of the code base. In March, I made a mistake in one of the updates, and from then on, my boss made it a habit to yell at me at least once every day and tell me how stupid I am. Additionally, he started calling me outside of my working hours to demand fixes for problems that at the most part were his own mistakes. At the start of May, he says to me that he doesn't want to fire me, but he would recommend that I find another job the next month. So I applied to several companies, and I was waiting for responses when he decided to terminate me 2 weeks later. The guy wrote a termination letter, and he sent it to my home address, but he didn't say a word to me, so I was quite shocked. When I received the letter, it stated that I was fired, starting July the 1st, and that I should take my remaining 20 vacation days in June. But in Germany, where I work, the employer is only obligated to give you the rest of your annual leave if you worked more than 6 months in the company for the year. Additionally, an important project, which I had been working on since February, was due mid-June, and not even close to being finished because my boss had prioritized tickets from other projects. So I wrote my boss that I would like to take the vacation days immediately, as written in the termination. But if he needed help finishing the current project, I would be willing to have the remaining vacation days be paid out to me. As soon as I sent the message, I saw in the chat program that he was typing. He answered that the number of vacation days in the letter of termination was a minor spelling mistake, that I only had 6 days left. After a quick chat with my friend's parents, who's an attorney, he starts laughing when I told him my boss's reaction. I then wrote my boss a formal email in which I informed him that I would definitely take the vacation days as stated in the letter. And because terminations also stated that the remaining vacation time will not be paid out, and I will withdraw the regarding offer. The next week, he grudgingly accepted the 20 vacation days, and I will never forget the expression of defeat on his face that last day, when he realized that the project he took a loan out for was about to phenomenally fail, because I was the only one working on it and he didn't even try to understand how it works. His slogan always was, "As long as it works, I don't care." Yeah, that boss was a complete idiot, guys. Like, why would you fire your only employee who's working on the project that you went into debt for? Like, what was his big plan there? Also, that slogan is terrible. As long as it works, I don't care. Maybe that works in the programming industry, but man, the amounts of rework we used to have to do because my old boss used to say, "It doesn't matter what it looks like, just get it done," was insane. Like, the guy never learned from it. We would cut corners on 10 jobs, guys, and only get caught on 2. So in his mind, it was all right. Some frickin' bosses, I tell ya. So during high school, I worked part-time at a grocery store that sounds similar to Jingles. We had a lot of cashiers quit and desperately needed more cashiers. At the time, I was making $10.50 an hour. Our GM then made a promotion where any cashiers hired got paid $11.25 an hour. So I go talk to my manager and said, "Hey, can I get that raise?" And the guy says, "No, it's only for new hires." Well, about after 2 weeks, I got fed up, being the only one who knew how to run the registers because I was really the only one with experience. I was training employees who were making more than me. I asked again to be on the same level of the people I'm training, and the answer was a hard no. I then realized that the promotion ended in about a month, so I talked with my parents about my plan. I waited until I knew he was going to struggle because people kept taking time off. I went into my shift, told my manager I quit. Here's my time card, here's my keys, and here's my vest. At that, my manager says, whoa, let's talk about this. I tell him no, and walk straight out. I enjoyed the weekend off, hung out with friends more often than I normally did, and didn't work at all that week. And on Friday, I went on the website and I applied again. I was called in for an interview with my former manager. He seemed relieved and arrogant that I was coming back, but at the end of the interview, I asked, since I'm a new hire, I also get the new hire bonus pay, right? Also, Janice gave me her referral code, so I can get that as well, right? I could tell my boss was very unhappy, but I did end up getting both. I missed 3 days of work, but I ended up making more from the referral bonus, and I got myself a 75-cent raise. Seriously, I have no idea what management was thinking with that little promotion, guys. Let's pay the new employee who absolutely knows nothing, that has less work responsibilities, more than the person that's currently employed and training them. Like, what a slap in the face. No wonder that place was struggling to keep workers. And guys, I only wished everybody followed what OP did and quit and then got rehired. Wouldn't that have been something? So at my last job, my boss, who we'll call Karen, hated me. She would turn everything into a competition, she mocked me publicly, she took credit for my work, and she divulged my personal medical information in front of all of our coworkers. She was cruel. Needless to say, I avoided her as much as I could. So now that the stage is set, here's the context. This took place end of 2020. Corona was blazing, and I had just had my first baby. I was a nervous wreck my entire pregnancy, working from home and being extra careful. After mat leave, I had returned to the office with some precautions set in place. My boss actually became crueler to me over the first few weeks back, and she suddenly announced that regardless of any negative feelings towards it, she had decided that we all had to attend this training in another state. Now keep in mind that at this point, there were mandatory 2-week at-home quarantines in place for anyone coming back to my state. But my boss fully planned on ignoring those quarantines and demanding we all return to the office as soon as we got back. I was carrying a heavy workload and pulling a lot of the weight around the office, and I had some rank. So I felt fully comfortable expressing my deep concerns to Karen, telling her that it was peak COVID season and that I had a newborn to worry about now. I expressed that I simply didn't feel comfortable going and asked if there was remote training I could attend instead. She firmly, adamantly insisted that there was no remote training, and she informed me that I could quit if I was upset with her decisions. Now it's important to note that she insisted this for weeks, even claiming to have contacted the training organization to make sure. I decided on the spot after the meeting that I would be quitting, but needed to check my boxes first, which took me a few weeks to figure out. Sometime after this meeting and her incessant insistence that there was no remote training, it finally occurred to me to check with the organization putting on the training and ask them to clarify if there truly was a remote training or not. So I did, and lo and behold, there was remote training, and they had been offering it for months. I asked them to email this information to me. Now to figure out how to use this valuable information, right? Wrong. As soon as I stepped back in the office, Karen starts fake empathizing with me out of nowhere in front of all of our coworkers, saying she really wished that she didn't need to force me to go to this training with my newborn and all. So I said to her, if you feel so bad, let me go to the remote training. She then looked at me in surprise and her face turned beet red. Before she could fight me, I pulled up the email with the information and I read it out loud in front of all of our coworkers. No one said anything, they just stared wide-eyed at her while she blubbered like a fool. Long story short, after pulling that fast one on her, I pulled her into a private meeting and gave my notice, and she was horrified because as I stated prior, I carried a lot of responsibilities around the office. But like she said, I could quit if I didn't like her decisions, so see you later. My goodness guys, just picturing OP reading that email in front of everyone and Karen getting embarrassed makes me so happy. But seriously, like, what did she get out of forcing everyone to go? I'd imagine sending everyone would cost the company a lot of money. Or is this the case where some people just love to flex their position of power guys and whatever I say goes? Whatever the case, good on OP for leaving a toxic boss. Oh, and one more thing, OP should have gone to HR and destroyed that Karen. Like, she hated OP to the point where she divulged OP's personal medical information in front of all coworkers, and that's messed. I'm pretty sure as a boss, that's highly illegal. So I'll keep the details as vague as possible because I'm still with this organization. I work for a government department. We have offices and locations all over the state. I'm based out of a city that's about a 2-and-a-bit-hour train ride to our head office. At the time, I was working in a team that had members working remotely all across the state, looking after policy, process, and quality assurance. Our old manager had gone and gotten himself promoted for being genuinely brilliant in his role. So our new manager, Steve, was hired in from the glorious world of banking. And in his words, he was here to whip us lazy public servants into shape. A few days after he began his role, he called us all to a teleconference to inform us that he wanted all of us to be at the head office at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning for an all-day in-person team meeting. He wanted to see us in meet space to size us up, to understand what we were doing, and to see where we weren't keeping up with the private sector. As I imagined, due to the nature of the work we were doing, we were all across the state. So in-person, whole team meetings were really rare, if they occurred at all. They were booked weeks in advance. Some of us tried to tell our new high-flyer manager that almost none of us were in the same city as him, and to be there on such short notice would mean travel expenses, meal allowances, overtime, etc. And he didn't seem to care. He told us in no uncertain terms to just be at the head office tomorrow at 8 a.m. before abruptly hanging up. Now with that said, I should explain something. I'm one of a handful of union delegates in our department. I know our award back to front, specifically the sections dealing with travel, allowances, and overtime. So I engaged in malicious compliance. If Steve wanted us there, fine, but it'll cost him. So I quickly went about emailing my team what Steve had done by requiring us to be at the head office at 8 a.m. and what to do. Because we'd have to travel outside our normal work hours, our workday clock started ticking the moment we left our homes and only stopped once we got home. Some of our team traveled overnight and they were entitled to overtime to travel, a dinner allowance, and accommodation for the night, the same returning. As someone traveling in the morning before 7 a.m., I was entitled to a breakfast allowance, a lunch allowance, and if I got home after 9 p.m., a dinner allowance also. So I left my house at 5 a.m. to catch the only train that would get me there in time. The train was running slightly behind, but it made it on time. So my first 3 hours of my workday down, and I had done no work. After a brief period of introducing ourselves to Steve, he proceeded to spend the next 4 hours telling us all about the things he did at the bank, how he made so much money for them, where they had sent him as a holiday bonus, how we were all stuck in the past in the public service, and the work he'd seen wasn't up to private sector standards, etc., etc. He had the cockiness of a finance bro who had always failed upwards because the others had picked up his slack. By 3 p.m., my entire team were in overtime pay territory, and Steve was just warming up with his non-charm offensive. Another 3 hours go by, with Steve verbally patting himself on his back, deeply in love hearing his own voice. But all I can hear is cha-ching, cha-ching. Steve then decided that 5 p.m. was a good time to finish up. He stopped mid-sentence, looked at his watch, and unceremoniously said, "That's all for today, go home now." And the guy walked out. After we all looked at each other awkwardly, we packed up and started to make our separate ways home after doing no work all day. I myself got to the train station pretty quickly and saw that a train was leaving soon and it would get me home around 8 p.m. Or I could catch the all stations train and get home closer to 9:30 p.m. You know what? No matter how fast I could run, I could just never catch that earlier train. And damn, I'd have to catch the all stations train and be on the clock for another hour and a half, plus have my dinner paid for. Such rotten luck. The next day, I submitted my claims, 4.5 hours at double rates, my train tickets, my taxi fares to and from the train station, my breakfast, lunch, and dinner allowances. For me alone, it was close to a $500 expense claim. The rest of my team followed suit, and they ensured they claimed everything too. Steve tried to fight us on approval for the claims, but quickly learned that unlike in the world of banking, most public servants are union, and we would raise living hell if he denied our guaranteed allowances. So with that, his all-day Steve Fest symposium blew a good $6,000 hole in his budget. Needless to say, while Steve was our manager, he never made us attend an in-person meeting again. Video conferencing was fine. He only lasted 6 months before leaving for new opportunities. He just went back to his old job at the bank. Guess he wasn't the one who couldn't keep up. I always love a good story where a big shot know-it-all guy gets what he deserves, guys. And to think he could have bragged over a video conference call and saved the company $6,000. What a guy. I thought about this one today and it made me smile, so I thought I would share. My first job out of high school was a big deal for me. It was a simple data entry job that I took very seriously. I started moving up very quickly. With so many entry-level employees, turnaround was high, and I guess sticking around made me stand out. I was soaring in that company. Before I knew it, I was a supervisor over a team. In the department I was in, there was only one other supervisor. We worked very well together and agreed on almost everything. The two of us made a full training for our department, also a department policy sheet, and conducted all direct employee contact. Our department was doing so well that the manager was recruited by another department for a much more lucrative role in the company. The new manager was the nicest man alive, but as an outside hire, he didn't know anything about how we ran things. At the same time he was getting acquainted with us, the other supervisor went on mat leave. I was the only lead in the department left that really knew what we were doing. Now it does sound rough, but I blossomed under these circumstances. I helped find our new acting supervisor, whom I'll call Trevor. I went into all meetings with my manager to take notes and to help him understand what we're discussing. I hired all the new staff members, from talking to the recruiter, conducting the interviews, and making the call to offer the position. I was running the show, and I loved it. Our new manager was not really grasping things and told me he was thinking about leaving. I was sad to see him go. He then told me that he thought he would ask them to have me backfill his position. This would have been the opportunity of a lifetime. A week later, my manager told me that he talked to the director, but the position wasn't going to me. It was going to the acting supervisor, Trevor. Apparently this guy had been schmoozing while I had been working. I hadn't even been paying attention to him. Trevor had become buddy-buddy with the director by spending all of his time in his office and going drinking with him at the driving range. I was heartbroken. I wasn't even aiming for the job until my boss suggested it to me. I had gotten my hopes up only to be crushed. I tried to shake it off and get back to work. I oversaw department projects. I had one that required thousands of entries on an Excel sheet. I assigned our staff to the project and I did my share. At the end of the day, I had gotten the sheets back from everyone directly under me, but nobody on Trevor's team had emailed me theirs. I went to one of their desks and asked about the project. The person I asked shyly told me that Trevor told her not to do it. When I asked her why he would say that, she told me that he said I wasn't her boss. And I was shocked. This is how we had done every project since we opened the department. And what was he thinking, telling people not to do it? Now I could explain the small ways that Trevor constantly was trying to undermine me, or the almost jealous behavior he displayed towards me, but this story is long enough. I'll just say that while shocking, it wasn't out of character for him. Then I realized what a golden opportunity this was. I decided to maliciously comply. I just nodded and thanked her for her help. The next day, the director called the manager and supervisor into his office. He asked me why the project wasn't completed the day before. I shrugged and told him I had sent it out to the team like I always do, and had even done a chunk of it myself. I then looked at Trevor. The look he gave me. The guy was pale, and he looked at me as if I was about to sentence him to death. When Trevor eventually tried to explain that he told the staff under him not to do it, the director asked everyone but Trevor to leave the office. The project had been related to payroll, and Trevor had royally screwed over the payroll staff. The director was livid. He was in there for over an hour. I heard the director raise his voice more than once, which was wild. The doors and office walls were glass. So when I passed by the office a bit later, I saw Trevor with his head down while our director was shaking his head and moving his hands in a very animated manner. A week later, the other supervisor returned. and Trevor was asked to return to his old position under her. I was offered the position of manager soon after, which I gladly accepted. Guys, all I have to say is, what exactly did Trevor expect to happen? And this person says it the best. This person says, it sounds like a narcissist at work. He has to feel important by undermining others and exercising power over others when there's no real reason to, and trying to one-up other people when they get praise, and the lying and backstabbing. I'm amazed he actually told the director that he told his team to not do the project instead of trying an excuse. What a loser. So while I was putting myself through university in the mid-2000s, I was working at a bicycle shop. Now honestly, I have to say it's the best place that I've ever worked. The owners treated their staff very well. So this shop retained loyal, highly capable employees that made loads of high-end sales. But what was somewhat unusual for a male-dominated industry in the mid-2000s was there was an equal number of male and female employees, and these women were definitely the most qualified people for the job. One was an engineer for a bike company, another was a highly successful triathlete, and even one of the owners was a woman. Almost having an unrelated university degree meant that I was by far the least impressive woman working at this place. I just liked bikes. So one day, a man who's maybe in his 50s or 60s came into the shop. I was the first on the scene. The guy said he was looking to buy a bike, so I start going through the usual probing questions to determine what kind of bike he was looking for. Simple questions like, did he ride on the road or trails? Now, even the most incapable salesperson could use the answers to these questions to point this guy in the right direction, but he seemed highly resistant to talking to me or answering my questions. The guy finally said, "Is there someone else I could talk to?" Now, maybe he didn't like my sales approach, or maybe I seemed too young to be knowledgeable. But since the guy didn't even give me a chance to prove myself, and he seemed to be staring longingly at my male colleague, I had a hunch that he didn't think a woman was capable of selling him a bike. So with that, I smiled and said, of course. Lucky for me, there weren't any idle male employees in sight. So I grabbed one of the other women that I worked with, quietly letting her know of my suspicions about the guy. Before I was even out of earshot, I hear this man say in an annoyed voice, "I need someone else." Suspicions confirmed. So we on purpose seek out yet another extremely capable female employee to help this man. When he sees her approach, the man shouts, "Just let me speak to your manager, everyone's useless." So with that, in struts the owner, who's very eager to join our malicious compliance stunt, with a beaming smile on her face. She comes in and says, "I'm the owner. What can I do to help you today, sir?" And the utter defeat on his face is something I'll never forget. And for those of you asking if he bought a bike, the guy half-heartedly let the owner help him for a few minutes, but he was very abrasive and he left without purchasing anything. She did not deem it a loss for the business though. Now that was wonderfully played, guys. I just wish the owner came out and was like, "I own this place, sir. Get out." And I love this person's comment saying, "Some people already know everything before they know anything. This fool cuts his nose off to spite his face. You should have one male employee who basically knows nothing about bicycles, and then when men like this ask for someone else to talk to, he's the one to get." So in college, I worked at the front desk for a dorm. Most of the time, it was a chill job. I worked nights and just had to help the occasional drunk student after they lost their keys. However, once a year, we had to deal with the worst of the worst, move out. Now, anyone who's ever experienced move out day knows the absolute crap show it is. During move out, the supervisor scheduled double the people at the front desk, so I had to work during the day. Our front desk was in the main community space for the dorms. Out front of the space was a super small lane that led to the parking garage. Everyone that needed to get to the parking garage had to use this lane. My whole shift was going fairly well, just small complaints about moving bins and our lack of resources for the summer heat. So far, so good, or so I thought. That's when up walks this family, a mom, dad, and daughter that were clearly annoyed. My 3 other coworkers were busy, so it was up to me to help this family. So I say, "Hi, what can I help you with?" The mom, in a snippy tone, says, "I was stung by a bee. I need some medical assistance." Now, as a student worker, the last thing I was allowed to do was provide medical care of any kind. I couldn't even hand out a band-aid. Knowing I can't help, I reply, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. As a desk worker, I'm not able to provide medical assistance, but..." And that's when the daughter cuts me off impatiently and says, "You don't even have a first aid kit? Can't you give us something to help?" Now, I would have assumed that they were worried about mom's health, but at this point, they sounded more upset that they weren't getting their way. So I say, we don't have first aid kits because I'm not allowed to administer first aid. If you'd like to get help, I would recommend walking over to health services. The daughter, sounding progressively more entitled and annoyed, said, "You want us to walk all the way to health services for a band-aid?" At this point, all I wanted was for them to leave, but I couldn't say that. So I tell them there's also an urgent care and hospital right off campus if you're worried about a reaction. The mom says, "I'm not driving all the way over to a hospital. I need help now. Just call someone for help or something." So cue the malicious compliance. Now normally I would call our non-emergency number for assistance, but this family clearly wanted quality care. So I asked the woman, "Would you like me to call 911? I'll see if they can help." The mom says, "Yes, do something." So with that, I called 911. The operator asked about the emergency, and I explained that it's a bee sting, and the operator says, "Are they allergic?" To which I asked the mom, and she says, "Well, no, but it's hurting." The operator then asked, "Do they have tweezers they could use to pull out the stinger?" So I asked the family, and to this, the daughter snaps, "Why would we have tweezers? Of course we don't have tweezers. We don't walk around with tweezers in our pockets. What kind of question is that?" So with this, I then relay the message to the operator and let her know the family specifically requested medical care. The operator sighed, clearly annoyed by this non-emergency, and let me know that she sent help. At this point, my line's getting incredibly long, so I asked the family to step to the side. When I tell them that help's on the way, the mom asked, "What are they sending?" To which I say, "I don't know." She then said, "Well, I hope it's not a fire truck. That would be so embarrassing for just a bee sting." So a few minutes go by, and I can tell the mom's starting to realize that she might have overreacted. She tries to tell her family that they can just leave, but the dad and daughter reminded her that they're already sending someone. As they wait, up comes a massive fire truck, sirens blaring. All the other families at the front desk, which is a lot because this family held up the line, turn to see what's going on, and the mom is absolutely mortified. The woman is looking around, trying to hide behind her family. It's hilarious. So she meets the emergency services outside, so they don't make a big scene in front of the other families. And the best part is the fire truck had to stop in the teeny tiny lane out in front of the community center, completely blocking the way into the parking garage. This means a line of cars was building up while she got her bee sting treated. With each car joining the line, she looked more and more embarrassed. Once she was treated, they came back in to get to the daughter's dorm. They walked quickly and avoided eye contact, clearly embarrassed by the overreaction. I hope they learned to stop with the impatience and the entitlement. As much as I hate calling 911 for trivial things, it was worth it to see the look of sheer humiliation on the mom's face. And I like to think that the operator was looking out for me in fulfilling my malicious compliance to the highest degree. Now that was some beautiful malicious compliance, guys. And as much as I hate it when Karens demand 911 for the tiniest things, as it's definitely a waste of time for responders, this one woman deserved it. And also, I wonder if she's gonna get a bill for this. If so, that's gonna be one expensive bee sting. So this happened a couple of years back in a pub I was working at. I worked the bar at this pub, which was a pretty popular place, especially on sunny days, as we had a lot of outdoor seating and a pretty huge beer garden. Now this story takes place one exceptionally hot summer day. For those of you who have the joy of not being all that familiar with our tea and crumpet society, I'll enlighten you as to why this is a pain for working in a pub. Firstly, the moment the sun blesses our sodden gray land with his presence, we the British come out of our thatched caves to bask in its glow like the lizard people our royal family is. This subsequently also means that everyone has the exact same thought of, let's go have a pint at the pub and sit in the sun. Yay for bartending. The other noteworthy point here is that on Sunday, a roast is had. Beef, lamb, chicken, or pork with roasted potatoes, veggies, gravy, and Yorkshire puddings. All of which is wonderful, unless you have to spend 2 hours cooking it. With that out of the way, this particular Sunday, we were full, and I mean full. The bar was 4 or 5 people deep, the 100 plus tables all double booked for turnover, and I found myself without a moment of rest between pouring drinks and telling people that we were fully booked. During this manic rush, I spot a bit of commotion outside, and I see a group of roughly 30 to 35 people, including screaming kids, walking through the courtyard, ignoring everyone, straight into the beer garden. Once my colleague and I had thinned down the numbers at the bar substantially, I told him that I was gonna walk past to see what the huge group was doing. Now, anyone that's worked with real-life people, of course, know that people suck, hence why I wanted to just walk past and avoid interaction. Also, it's a pet peeve of mine when people just sit themselves down, ignoring all the staff and expecting us to accommodate them without even the courtesy of mentioning to someone that they're here. So I take a step past the bar to the beer garden, collecting empty glasses as I go. As I near the area the group has settled in, I'm spotted by a very angry woman, the alpha Karen, if you will, snapping her fingers at me to try to get my attention as I tried to get away. The woman then stormed up to me and she stares me dead in the face and says, "Excuse me, we've been waiting here for the last 15 minutes and no one has come to give us menus. What the hell are you all doing?" Now, I will admit that I was momentarily in shock, as the group had to walk through the courtyard and must have seen the crowds of people and the stress waiters everywhere. I say to her, "I'm sorry, madam, but I had no idea you were here. Did you speak with anyone to let us know?" Now, this is when I saw the rage build just below her plasticized skin, and she says, "Yes, I spoke with that redhead." Now, I do want to note that no one worked here was a redhead. And she continues on and says, "Well, anyways, I want some menus because we are starving." I then looked past her and asked her how many there were, and she says, "We are 36 people. That's not a problem, is it?" She said this without so much as a hint of understanding why this was ridiculous. I tell her, "Well, yes, actually, that's quite a lot for a walk-in. And as you probably saw on your way in, we're extremely busy. I'm afraid we have no tables available, and we don't serve food in the beer garden. You'll have to try your luck at getting a table in the courtyard, but I can't imagine you'll be able to find enough seating for 36 people, and I simply can't hold tables for you turning other guests away." Hearing me say that, she stared at me for a moment, and then she said, "You don't serve food in the beer garden, or you won't serve me food in the beer garden." I tell her, "No, madam, the establishment does not serve food in the beer garden." At that, Karen says, "Ugh, fine, can we just have chips then, for the kids? They're starving." Now, I did really think about it for a moment, deciding if I was really willing to put up with this, or if I should just say no and send them on their way. Against my better judgment, I said okay, but they would have to sit in the courtyard once the tables were available, and asked roughly how many portions of chips that they'd be wanting. She replied 6, and I said that's probably fine, but she'll have to go inside to order. Now, that did not sit well with her, and she started to get very cross. On my way back in, I swung by the kitchen to let them know what's up, and to expect 6 chip orders, but not to rush them because the woman was in enormous pain. I then get back to the bar and it's busy again, 3 to 4 people deep, so I immediately jump in and start pouring pints. A few minutes later, I hear, "Oh, for God's sake, this is ridiculous." And I immediately know who it was. This tiny, angry woman pushes her way through the crowd and she snaps her fingers in my face to get my attention. She then says to me, "You, I want to order my chips, and hurry up, my kids are hungry." So I say, "Okay, I'll put them on now, 6 portions, correct?" And the woman says, "No, 17 portions, where did you get 6 from?" Sufficient to say, I was bewildered. I say to her, "Madam, that's not what we discussed. I'll have to see if the kitchen can even do that. We're very, very busy." The Karen then says to me, "Well, go on then. Run along to the kitchen." As I was about to, I hear, "Actually, make it 35 portions." I tell her, "Madam, I'll be honest with you, there's no way you'll get them all at once. It's simply way too many for the fryer. It'll have to be in batches, and it's gonna take a while as there's more pressing orders ahead of you. You'll also have to pay up front." The woman says, "I don't care. Bring them one by one if you have to. As soon as one's ready, bring it out." And I'm thinking, bingo. I then went to speak to the chef, explaining what's going on. Rude woman, many chips, one by one. The guy laughed, and we decided that we're gonna do exactly as she asked, bring on the malicious compliance. So despite being very, very busy, as soon as one portion of chips was ready, I took it out. One portion. Only one. And of course, the woman was not pleased, and she says, "What the hell is this? I said 35 portions, not one." I say to her, "As I explained to you inside, madam, 35 portions is simply too many for the fryers to handle, and there is a substantial number of other orders ahead of you. The place is full." Now I had to try very hard to hide my grin at this point. The woman then sputters and says, But what the hell do you expect me to do with this?" I say to her, "Perhaps you could have one chip each per portion?" And with that, I swiftly turned and walked away. Following this, every 10 to 15 minutes, I would take out one more order, and only one more portion of chips to the group. By about portion 12, they had been there several hours, and they were fed up. They tried to complain to the manager, but she was so rude and disrespectful to myself, my manager, and the other staff members that he dismissed her, stating that I explained to her very clearly that we're very busy, and she herself told me to bring them out one portion at a time if need be. They left very angry, and we had 23 portions of chips all paid for, that all the staff got to enjoy later on. Guys, either the entitlement is super duper strong with this woman, or she's never been out to eat at a restaurant. Like, holy cow. 35 people walking into a restaurant with no reservation is a freaking nightmare, especially during busy rush hour. And for her to just snap her fingers in OP's face, demanding 35 portions of food is absolutely crazy. And honestly, I'd like to think that those 23 portions that she paid for and didn't eat was the a-hole tax for that little stunt they pulled. So I deliver bulk water to people who don't have access to city water or their own private well. For nearly all customers, it's a simple process. They call for deliveries or they agree to have automatic deliveries. When I show up, I hook the truck up to the fill pipe and start pumping, and either listen at the vent or hook up to an installed alarm in order to know when the holding tank is full. So this particular customer had their holding tank installed in a small utility room next to their living room, and they didn't install a vent to it outside. And they refused to allow us to install an alarm because they didn't want us to put a 1/4-inch hole in the wall to run the alarm wire. So the solution was they would call when they needed 2,000 gallons of water, and we would show up and pump exactly 2,000 gallons of water. This procedure worked without flaw for over a decade. Literally hundreds of deliveries with no issue. Cue the owner deciding to sell. We're then contacted by the new owners, and we set them up as a new account, and we head over for the first delivery and meeting. We especially go over the issue with us being totally unable to tell when the tank is full. We even offered to install the alarm again for free, but they declined. So we let them know that when they call for water, they must be sure that they have enough room in the tank for 2,000 gallons, or they let us know how much water they have room for. We went over this several times, and they laughed each time saying that they understood, and they would call when they were below the 2,000 gallon mark. So with that, 2 weeks go by, and we receive a message on our answering machine from the new customer. No gallon amount is specified. Now this did set off a warning bell though, because it was a household of 2 people, and it's only been 2 weeks since we filled them last. That's highly abnormal. We expected more like 4 to 5 weeks. So we call back just to double check. There was no answer, so we leave a message asking for confirmation. A couple of hours later, we try again. By the next day, we had left 4 messages asking them to confirm that they were ready for a full load. There was no reply again. At this point, we're thinking, well, they did call, so the boss sends me out. I knock on the door as a last attempt and still no answer. So at that point, I hook up, start the pump, and set the timer so I don't overpump while reading my book. 15 minutes later, I hop out to check the water meter, and it's at 1,700 gallons. I'll watch for the next couple of minutes and shut it down. And that's when I hear the front door just burst open. And the woman who bought the house and had called us in yesterday is screaming to shut the water down because there's water everywhere. And what the hell are we doing? This woman's been ignoring our calls, and she even ignored me at her door, and now she's screaming at me. Apparently she had called when the tank was half full, instead of down below the mark where the 2,000 gallons is. And she totally disregarded all of our messages and didn't feel like talking to me when I knocked. So now the woman has 700 plus gallons of water in her living room. Of course, my boss was called out so she could scream at him. Her husband then came from work so he too could scream at us, for reasons I guess. They then made a lot of demands how we were gonna pay to fix it, and we said no. The boss then laid down how we saw the situation. He said, you can keep the water free of charge or you don't call us for water anymore. Y'all are too stupid to work with. We never did hear from them again. Holy cow guys, like 700 gallons of water damage in that home. And this was all on them. Like if you're not smart enough to accept a free alarm system to prevent this from happening, you kind of deserve this. I used to work in a warehouse, and one day we got a new floor manager. The guy had this grand idea that he was gonna make an already functional supply warehouse work even better. It's important to note that all of our deliveries were sent out on time, received on time. There were no workplace accidents other than the occasional stub toe or splinter from a wooden box. The place ran about as smoothly and efficiently as possible, but it wasn't good enough for the new manager. The guy made it a point to check on everyone, getting into things that weren't his business and things that he didn't know about. One of his biggest things was making sure that everyone was at work on time. We didn't really have a time clock, we just wrote down when we got in and when we left. The new manager insisted that a punch card system would work much better for us, but the owners weren't willing to invest in that. So the new manager would spend every morning watching everyone come through the front door. We had maybe 50 people who worked there, so he made sure to count who came in and when they came in. Anyone who walked in the door past 8:05 a.m. got written up. This is when he met the old guy. Now, the old guy had been with the company pretty much since it opened. He knew everything and everyone there. He's a great guy, and everyone liked him. On the second or third day of the new manager watching everyone come in, he sees the old guy walking in the front doors at 8:15. The new manager rips into the old guy, telling him that he was late, that it was unacceptable, and that he was getting written up. The guy was yelling in the middle of the warehouse, where everyone can see and hear him. The old guy tries to explain, but he gets told to just shut up. The new manager tops this all off with an order. He says, this warehouse opens at 8 a.m. sharp every day. 5 days a week, and I expect you at that door at 8 a.m. to begin your shift. You will be here when the warehouse opens. Is that understood? The old guy just kind of smiles, takes the paperwork, and apologizes, stating that he'll be in tomorrow at 8 a.m. as he was told. The smug look on the new manager's face was picture perfect. He was certain that he had just fixed the biggest flaw in the company. So the next day at 8 a.m. sharp, the old guy walked through the door and simply made sure that he was seen. He then went off into the warehouse, and that day was a nightmare. The orders were backed up, the trucks were waiting on paperwork, and the new manager is almost in tears because of the chaos. That's when the owner comes in and starts trying to make sense of the situation with the new manager, and they track the paperwork issue back to the old guy. The new manager's upset, but the owner's concerned and asks the old guy if everything's okay. The old guy just tries to hide his embarrassment, saying that the new manager wrote him up the day before and he was told to come in at 8 a.m., not at 4 a.m. like he usually does. The day before, when he walked in, he had been coming in from a break. The new manager then tried to backpedal, saying he didn't know, that it was the old guy's fault. But the owner knew better. After that, the new manager wasn't working at the warehouse anymore or for the company. Now, thankfully, the old guy knew what was going to happen, and he had most of the paperwork done for the day, so we weren't too behind when the smoke cleared. Guys, you know I love power-tripping bosses getting what they deserve. The new manager tried to assert his dominance, and the guy got absolutely destroyed. And the part where I read that the old guy starts at 4 a.m. every day, I laughed so hard at that. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/Maliciouscompliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit the thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed yesterday's episode on the channel, it's an r/I don't work here lady episode, where this entitled Karen decides to slap everyone for not obeying her, and she's not scared of police. Guys, go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.